Who really murdered a Minocqua woman while she closed up a bank 37 years ago? This morning, a judge began to hear the evidence against Robin Mendez, the man prosecutors say there's no doubt killed his wife Barbara back in 1982. The defense, though, claims someone else is responsible and plans to prove it over a trial set to go several weeks. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride has been following this case for months. She joins us live after hearing testimony from day one of the trial. Rose, good evening.
Lane, this trial differs from others in a few different ways. First, a judge, instead of a jury, will be the lone decider of whether Robin Mendez is guilty or not guilty. Second, since this case is 37 years old, some of the witnesses and experts from that time have since died. In his opening argument today, Mendez's attorney Peter Prusinski told the judge he plans to pin the murder on a man named Thomas Bose, who has since died. Evidence shows Bose was at the Park City Credit Union on the day Barbara Mendez was killed.
The story revolves around three people: Robin Mendez, Thomas Bose, and Raymond Norris, and how this community has misunderstood, brushed aside, or never knew what else happened 37 years ago.
District Attorney Michael Sheik called several witnesses to the stand today: a retired police chief who was a patrolman on the Minocqua Police Department at the time, and a medical examiner who reviewed the case.
After you analyze that and look at the facts and the evidence that we have against Mr. Mendez, that there will be no doubt that Mr. Mendez is guilty of first-degree murder.
The third witness today was Dawn Shape, Barbara and Robin's daughter. She recalled details of the day her mother was murdered in her testimony today. We'll hear more from Dawn coming up tonight on Newswatch 12 at 6. Live in Oneida County, Rose McBride, Newswatch 12.
For more than 2 hours today, lawyers asked Dawn Shape to recall in detail the day her mother was murdered. Her father, Robin Mendez, is accused of killing Barbara Mendez in 1982. Mendez's trial began this morning in Oneida County courts, and Newswatch 12's Rose McBride was there. She's been following this case for quite some time. She joins us live with more from day one. Rose, good evening.
Lane, there are some things Dawn remembers clearly about that day. She and her sister Christy got off the school bus at about 3:40. Her father was home before 5. They had tacos for dinner. But since the day in question was 37 years ago, there were other things lawyers asked her on the stand today that she just couldn't recall. But what she does remember is the way she felt when she knew her mother wasn't coming home.
Robin Mendez sat quietly as his daughter Dawn recalled the relationship they once had.
I was kind of like Daddy's little girl.
Why do you say that?
I just really adored him, really loved him, and I just felt close to him.
She told the court today she also had a good relationship with her mother, Barbara. Dawn was just in middle school when Barbara was killed while closing up a bank in Minocqua.
I was only 13, and I had to try to understand something really big like murder.
Today, lawyers asked her to recall where she was and what she was doing on April 28, 1982, as well as where her father was. Some details are clear. Others that the defense pried for, like if her father was home for a critical hour in question, don't come as easily 37 years later.
I was 13. Like, I wasn't paying attention all the time. Those are just normal things, you know.
Now 50, Dawn also recalled the days and weeks after the murder when she spoke with police.
Any one of our stories weren't right, then Dad could get arrested for murder. And I didn't want to lose another parent.
She said she, Robin, and her younger sister Christy spent time going over the story of what happened that night and had a big fear that she would go from having 2 parents at home to none.
I relied on Dad because he was the only thing I had left.
The prosecution also called 2 other witnesses today. The medical examiner from Fond du Lac County, who's familiar with the autopsy since the original medical examiner from that case is now dead. And a patrolman from the Minocqua Police Department who arrived on the scene of the murder also testified today. Tomorrow, Dawn's sister and Robin's daughter, Christy, will testify.
Robin Mendez's youngest daughter told the court today she rehearsed her story with Mendez about what happened the night her mother was murdered. When talking to the police after the 1982 murder, Mendez's daughters became his alibis. But 37 years later, she says she can't tell the difference between memories she made on her own and ones that were manipulated. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride heard testimony today at the second day of Mendez's murder trial. She joins us live outside the courthouse. Rose, good evening.
Lane, Mendez is on trial for killing his wife back in 1982. His youngest daughter said that when she was being questioned by police at the time, she wanted to make sure she did everything she could to protect her family. So she gave the police an alibi for her father during a critical hour of that investigation. But as she began doing more research about the case years later on her own, she says she can't be sure what happened that night. We're protecting her identity because she was a minor at the time.
I cannot attest to any independent memories, and I believe my memories are so convoluted between what I actually remember and what we rehearsed to say that I cannot speak to whether he was home or not home.
The prosecution also called 2 other witnesses to the stand today. We cannot show them to protect their identities. They both said Mendez told them in detail how and why he killed his wife. The witnesses told the court Mendez said he killed his wife with a crowbar-like object from a motorcycle repair kit. They knew the details that hadn't been revealed to the public, like that he claimed he did not have enough money to buy his wife a headstone, but later got a new motorcycle. They also say he told them he was having an affair with a 14-year-old girl. We heard from that girl, who is now a woman, in court today. We'll hear from her tonight on Newswatch 12 at 6. Live in Oneida County, Rose McBride, Newswatch 12.
Good evening. A woman testified that Robin Mendez told her he was, quote, footloose and fancy-free the night his wife Barbara was murdered. That woman was just 14 at the time and was involved in a sexual relationship with Robin Mendez. Mendez is now on trial for killing his wife back in 1982. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride heard testimony at day 2 of the trial. She joins us live in the studio with our top story. Rose, good evening.
Lane, the woman you mentioned told the court today she believed she was in love with Mendez and that one day they would be together. Mendez was a youth leader at his church, and he told the woman it wouldn't look good in the eyes of the church if he got divorced. The victim was clearly emotional today as she told the judge the extent of their relationship. Because the victim was underage at the time, we are protecting her identity. Robin Mendez was 33 years old when he was in a sexual relationship with the 14-year-old daughter of a family friend.
I thought he loved me and thought he was going to marry me someday, and
Why would you think that?
because that's what he told me.
The relationship began before his wife's murder and continued after. The victim said she never heard Mendez say he wanted to kill Barbara, just that it would be simpler for them to be together if Barbara wasn't there.
He talked once that it'd be so much easier if maybe she got in an accident or something like that.
Mendez wrote her letters, some that she read in court today.
I'll be thinking of ways to see you. We've always made out before, and we'll find ways now too. We just have to be extremely careful for a while.
The letter was not dated, but the victim does think the letter was written after Barbara's murder. Mendez was arrested for sexually assaulting the woman when she was a minor. When they interviewed her in that investigation, police also questioned her about whether she knew about the night of Barbara's murder. The trial continues on Monday.
Police did not find the murder weapon at the scene when Barbara Mendez was killed back in 1982. Barbara's injuries suggest she was hit with something in the back of her head. Prosecutors want to prove the type of injuries likely came from an item that her husband, Robin Mendez, had easy access to. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride joins us live outside the Oneida County Courthouse. She was at day 3 of Robin Mendez's trial. Rose, good evening.
Lane, at the time of the murder, Robin Mendez worked at his family's upholstery business. He and his brother also used to fix roofs. That's why prosecutors think that he used a Wonder Bar, a tool commonly used in both of those businesses, to kill his wife.
After Barbara Mendez's murder, time passed with no answers and no arrests. Robin Mendez's older brother, Ben Mendez, contacted police himself after the initial 1982 investigation.
Because I was concerned about the fact that the case had not been formally solved, and I was concerned that my brother Bob was involved.
Mendez testified Monday he worked with Robin, or Bob as he called him, in the family's upholstery business. They used a tool called a Wonder Bar in their work. Ben left the business in 1985, but kept a Wonder Bar that he later turned over to investigators in the early 2000s.
I kept it because of its potential significance as a weapon that may have been similar to the one used in Barbara's death.
Investigators can't say for sure what weapon was used to kill Barbara, but forensic consultant Christopher Robinson says the wounds to Barbara's head could have come from a Wonder Bar.
They're rough, they're not like a knife, so as you pull them across the skull, it's going to leave irregular lacerations.
He used clay molds to test the type of damage a Wonder Bar would do. Robinson said clay responds similarly to skin. Defense attorney Peter Persinski argued prosecutors didn't do enough tests to prove another weapon could have been used.
There was no testing of the force used with each blow, correct?
I did not.
No measurements made
I did not.
with any of this, right?
No, sir.
No testing for crushing skull.
No, sir.
During his testimony, Robinson ruled out other weapons, like a different type of pry bar and a socket wrench.
It's this type of tool, the pry bar that you see before you, Your Honor, in my opinion, would be the type of tool that would have been used when she was killed.
Robinson often works with the TV show Cold Justice, which is how he initially got involved with this case. That show came to investigate in the winter of 2018. Tonight at 6, we'll hear more from Ben Mendez, Robin Mendez's brother, about how he thinks that Robin Mendez was acting differently before Barbara's murder. Live in Oneida County, Rose McBride, Newswatch 12.
Ben Mendez told the court today his brother Robin began acting differently before Barbara Mendez was murdered back in 1982. Well, now Robin is standing trial for his wife's murder. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride was at day 3 of that trial in Oneida County Court. She joins us live in the studio with more tonight. Rose, good evening.
Lane, the brothers worked at the family's upholstery business together. Ben Mendez said he had concerns about his brother's behavior, but wasn't sure exactly what was going on. He said Robin would leave the upholstery shop throughout the day and come back having showered and put on cologne.
He would look for reasons to take what we called a town run. And he would go, and it might have been a simple town run that he wanted or insisted on going on, and some days no town run at all that we had planned, and he would go.
This afternoon, Robin Mendez's ex-wife told the court she and Mendez spoke about what happened to Barbara. Mendez was married to Lori Domke in 1984 until they divorced in 2004. Domke said Mendez told her he spoke with his daughters about getting their story straight. He also offered Domke information about why he could be placed at the scene the night Barbara was murdered.
He kind of made it aware that if his fingerprints were behind the counter, it was because he was behind the counter all the time. And he also said if there were any hairs found, it would be because he shared a jacket.
Barbara's sister also testified this afternoon. She confirmed that she saw Barbara's car at Park City Credit Union the night of the murder. Barbara's sister also told the judge her family, rather than Robin, bought the headstone for Barbara's grave. The trial continues tomorrow at 8:30 in the morning.
Sherry Anderson knew her friend's marriage to Robin Mendez was strained. Anderson talked to Barbara Mendez about it for hours on April 27, 1982. She knew she wanted to follow up the next day, but Anderson never got the chance. Mendez was found dead the next night. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride heard Anderson's testimony in Oneida County Court today during Robin Mendez's murder trial. She joins us live with more tonight. Rose, good evening.
Lane, Anderson didn't know who killed her friend back then, but she did grow increasingly suspicious of Robin Mendez. 37 years later, she believes he is the one who did it, and her memory could be the key to the prosecution.
The night Barbara Mendez was murdered, Robin Mendez arrived at the Lakeland Assembly of God Church prior to the 7 o'clock Mass his family would go to every Wednesday. They would see friends, including Sherry Anderson. When she arrived at church for Wednesday night service, Anderson asked Mendez where Barbara was.
He told me that she had called home at 5:45 and said that she was still working and would be late.
After the murder, Anderson read an article from the Lakeland Times that said Barbara was killed shortly after 5 o'clock.
I was like, that can't be. The newspaper's wrong. They've got their information wrong, because she called home at 5:45 and I was
completely sure that she had called home at 5:45.
But as time passed, Anderson began to doubt Mendez's story. Mendez's attorney pressed Anderson about why she didn't tell investigators about her suspicions. She says she was becoming afraid of Mendez. She says he came to her house one day and tried to dissuade her from those exact times.
After he left, I went back into my bedroom and said, "This is what I remember, this is the times, and I know what I know."
Anderson says she became afraid that Robin did kill Barbara, but she didn't want him to know that, as he was constantly looking into the investigation. Tonight at 6, we'll hear from someone who saw Barbara on the last day of her life. Live in Oneida County, Rose McBride, Newswatch 12.
Good evening. It took more than 4 full days, about a dozen witnesses, and not 1 but 2 delays. But today, the prosecution rested against Robin Mendez in a murder case going back to 1982. Mendez's defense attorney argued there's not enough physical evidence to convict his client of murder. Attorney Peter Przinski asked the judge to dismiss the case altogether. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride joins us live outside the Oneida County Courthouse after day 5 of the trial. Rose, good evening.
Lane Przinski says that all evidence against Mendez is just circumstantial. But District Attorney Michael Sheik said the timeline of the night that Barbara was killed and the months afterwards, coupled with the numerous witness testimonies we've heard so far, point to Robin Mendez as the killer.
Yes.
Testimony from Oneida County Sheriff's Captain Terry Hook concluded the state's case against Robin Mendez. Before defense attorney Peter Przinski began calling witnesses, he asked Judge Jill Falstad to dismiss the case against Mendez.
There's really just nothing as far as physical evidence goes that even could tie him to it circumstantially.
Przinski pointed to the lack of a murder weapon and no DNA evidence as reasons why his client should not be found guilty. In the past 5 days, witnesses testified that Mendez either alluded to killing his wife or directly said he did. But Przinski says that is not definitive proof.
We have statements made by my client, but they in themselves do not prove beyond reasonable doubt that my client committed a murder.
In response to Przinski's request, Sheik said his witnesses collectively told a story that pieces together what happened the night of the murder. He said after hearing from witnesses, Mendez had a clear motive. He was sexually assaulting a young girl.
If she's 13, 14 years old, he's been sexually assaulting her for at least 9 or 10 months. We have his behavior afterwards. Within 24 hours, he has sexual intercourse with her.
Sheik argued that if the assault was known at the time of the murder, it would have placed more attention on Mendez.
That kind of changes the focus of everything because nobody knew about it, so nobody really focused on the defendant the way they should have.
Judge Jill Falstad found enough evidence to move forward and denied Przinski's request.
After that request was denied, Przinski started calling his own witnesses to the stand. We will hear from some of those witnesses coming up tonight on Newswatch 12 at 6. Live in Oneida County, Rose McBride, Newswatch 12.
Robin Mendez's defense attorney tried to show a judge today that another man killed Barbara Mendez back in 1982. That man, Thomas Bowes, tried to open an account at Park City Credit Union in Minocqua the afternoon Barbara was killed. But the witness attorney Peter Przinski called to the stand today did not remember very much. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride has details on the first day of defense testimony in Mendez's murder trial. Rose, good evening.
Lane, Thomas Bowes' bank identification card was found on the ground at the crime scene. His brother Michael was in town on the day of the murder and lent Thomas some money. Michael could not account for where Thomas was at the time of the murder, but didn't believe his brother was capable of killing someone. Michael appeared via video call in court today.
I don't believe he did it. Could he have broke into that place at night and robbed it? Oh yeah, if he knew the stuff was laying there. But he, couldn't face somebody head-on and do something like that. Period.
The defense also called a woman who was a customer at the credit union who saw 2 men arguing over money earlier that day. The 2 men are assumed to be the Bowes brothers. After the woman got her money, she hurried away because she said she was afraid of the 2 men.
They appeared to be, I use the word casing, the inside of the bank. It's just how they were acting and looking as though they were looking for the ins and outs of the bank.
A man named Raymond Norris also took the stand this afternoon. Norris came forward 2 years after the murder and claimed to have been Bose's getaway driver, but later said that he made it all up. Today, Norris says after a stroke, he has memory problems and could not give definitive answers when asked questions about what happened back in 1982. The defense will continue calling witnesses again tomorrow. Lane.
Good evening. Both attorneys in Robin Mendez's murder trial did what they could to win the case in court over the last couple of weeks. Now Mendez's future is in the hands of Judge Jill Falstad. After 7 days of hearing testimony, Falstad will decide if Mendez is guilty of killing his wife Barbara in 1982. District Attorney Michael Sheik and Defense Attorney Peter Brzezinski gave their closing arguments this morning in Oneida County Court. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride was there. She joins us live outside the courthouse with what each attorney wanted the judge to know. Rose, good evening.
Lane, Sheik says Mendez had both the motive and the intent to kill Barbara. The motive being he was sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl at the time of the murder. And from the scene, he says that it was clear someone had planned out the murder, that it was premeditated. But Brzezinski said there is still enough reasonable doubt that she cannot convict Mendez.
Barbara followed behind him.
Much of the evidence against Robin Mendez is circumstantial. But District Attorney Michael Sheik says those more than 75 pieces of circumstantial evidence combined to make a strong case. Sheik argued since Barbara had no defensive wounds, she likely knew her murderer and unlocked the doors to let him into the credit union where she was working after hours.
There's no evidence of things strewn about the floor. There's no other disorganization which would indicate that she struggled with anybody.
The state says Mendez had the motive and intent to kill. He thought if his wife were to disappear, he could further his relationship with a 14-year-old girl he was assaulting.
For the murder, the defendant is already talking about it. He's already talking about, was she had an accident? We could be together, continue this relationship.
In addition to the circumstantial evidence, Sheik argued there is direct evidence, including quasi-admissions from Mendez, some in the form of a letter to that 14-year-old girl.
He says, think about what's happened in the last 3 months, the last 6 months. A lot can happen in a short time. Again, that has to be referring to Barbara Mendez's murder. It's a clear inference.
Defense attorney Peter Brzezinski says just because Mendez is a sex offender does not mean he is a murderer. He argued that another man, Thomas Bose, committed the murder. He needed money and would do anything to get it.
The apparent motive for the murder was robbery. That is a common sense reason for this crime that we can say as a motive, Your Honor.
Brzezinski argued if not Bose, then another robbery suspect who was never found could have committed the murder. According to local papers at the time, the Park City robbery was the 4th one that year. Brzezinski argued throughout the trial, since no one saw who killed Barbara Mendez, no weapon was found, and no physical evidence linked his client to the scene, there is just not enough proof to convict.
There's reasonable doubt. And Your Honor, if all of this, after all this that we've gone through, is not reasonable doubt, what is?
Since this is a bench trial instead of a jury trial, Judge Jill Falstad will take some time to deliberate. She will deliver her verdict Tuesday at 1 p.m. Live in Oneida County, Rose McBride, Newswatch 12.
Tonight, we wait. Lawyers finished giving their arguments today in the murder trial of Robin Mendez, but we won't know his fate until next Tuesday when Judge Jill Falstad decides if Mendez is guilty of murdering his wife back in 1982. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride joins us in the studio to let us know what those lawyers told the judge in this final day of the trial. Rose, good evening.
Lane, District Attorney Michael Sheik argued Robin Mendez had the motive to kill his wife. He was sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl at the time and wanted to further his relationship with her. In 1982, his daughters told police Mendez was in the house with them at the time of the murder. But they now say they were coached by their father and don't have independent memories of the time. Today, defense attorney Peter Brzezinski said the alibi they gave in 1982 should still stand and they would remember anything unusual.
They don't want to be his alibi because they've picked their side in this case. But there are actual facts of things that they saw going on in that house that night. And there's things they didn't see. And there's things we would expect them to see, some odd or strange behavior going on if he's rushing in and out of the house.
Brzezinski said if Mendez had killed Barbara, something would seem off to the girls. But Sheik says the fact that Mendez was so calm after the murder, speaks to the kind of person that he is.
It's the same person that would have sexual intercourse with somebody 24 hours after his wife was murdered in the home that he lived with his wife and children in. It's that same mindset, Judge. There's nothing there. There's no conscience. There's no guilt.
Sheik argued that while much of the evidence is circumstantial, there is enough evidence to tell the story of what happened the night Barbara was killed. Since this is a bench trial instead of a jury trial, Judge Jill Falstad will take some time to deliberate. We will have a verdict Tuesday at 1 p.m. Lane.
Good evening. Barbara Mendez's family waited 37 years to finally see her killer brought to justice. She was murdered while working at the Park City Credit Union in Minocqua back in 1982. This afternoon, Judge Jill Falstad convicted Barbara's husband, Robin, of her murder. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride has been following this case since the beginning. She joins us live outside the Oneida County Courthouse tonight. Rose, good evening.
Lane, friends and family of Barbara Mendez hugged each other after the hearing today. This conviction brings both an end to the trial and the 37 years of waiting for a killer to finally be convicted.
Robin Mendez had no expression on his face as Judge Jill Falstad delivered a guilty verdict, which carries a life sentence for killing his wife in 1982. But the faces of the prosecution showed relief that this 37-year-old case finally came to a close with the verdict they were hoping for.
I've known this family and been involved with this family for five or 6 years now, and to be here at the end of this today is wonderful.
Barbara and Robin's daughters were just 13 and 11 when their mother was killed. For years, they wanted answers. The daughters went to the TV show Cold Justice, which refocused on Robin. Judge Falstad finally gave them the justice they wanted. After the verdict, one of their daughters, Dawn, gave a prepared statement.
It is in this hope that the light of repentance and the fullness of redemption wins.
Mendez not only killed his wife, he also sexually assaulted a teenage girl back in 1982. Captain Terry Hook says the conviction means he won't be able to hurt anyone else.
Luckily, what I do know is he's not going to be victimizing anybody else. That was really what we wanted to get here, that he would never hurt anyone else again.
Mendez's sentencing hasn't been scheduled yet, but a conviction of first-degree murder does hold a life sentence in prison. Coming up tonight at 6, we'll give you some of the details on why Judge Jill Falstad made her decision. Live in Oneida County, Rose McBride, Newswatch 12.
Good evening. A judge pondered Robin Mendez's murder trial evidence for 6 days. Today, after 80 minutes of explanations, Judge Jill Falstad convicted Robin Mendez of first-degree murder this afternoon for killing his wife Barbara back in 1982. Mendez requested a bench trial rather than a jury trial, making Falstad the sole person who would decide if Mendez was guilty or not guilty. Falstad spent 7 days listening to testimony from witnesses in this 37-year-old cold case. Newswatch 12's Rose McBride was there for every day of that evidence. She joins us with more on how Falstad made her decision today. Rose, good evening.
Lane, Falstad went over testimony from witnesses before she announced her decision. She found testimony from a forensics expert, Mendez's daughters, and the teenager Mendez was sexually abusing at the time of the murder all credible. But the testimony from 2 people Mendez confessed to after being arrested back in February of 2018 seemed to influence Falstad's decision heavily. We won't release the identities of these 2 people for their safety, but they knew details about the murder that police didn't know until after filing a criminal complaint.
With that, the court finds that Robin Mendez did confess or admit that he is the person who murdered Barb Mendez on April 28, 1982.
Until that day, Mendez had not confessed to anyone. Oneida County Sheriff's Captain Terry Hook says she isn't sure why, after nearly 40 years, Mendez chose these 2 people to confess to.
That was shocking to me, and in the very beginning I didn't actually believe that they were going to give us information that was helpful, but it turned out to be truthful.
Mendez's sentencing hasn't been scheduled yet, but a conviction of first-degree murder does hold a life sentence. The conviction brought justice to Barbara's family. You can hear from one of her daughters on our website later tonight.